Hello everyone and welcome to CPS 360. I'm Drury and today we have an interview with the Columbia Public Schools Activities Director, David Eagan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks for having me.
First off, as we start, just the day-to-day, what does it look like to be the Columbia Public Schools Activities Director? What are some of the things you do from one day to the next, and what does it look like?
Sure. So much of my role really is working on macro level type things that are district-wide, things that impact all of our schools, really trying to ensure equitable opportunities as best we can for students. So from a day-to-day perspective, that can really kind of vary depending on the day and depending on what we're working on. One thing that probably is consistent from a daily standpoint is that I do support our building level ADs. And so as they are navigating, whether it's compliance or scheduling or, issues that they're facing, I'm a resource for them to kind of help work through that. But otherwise it's, whether it's, looking at deferred maintenance and facility needs and advocating for those. Next week, for example, stipend committee meets, and so one of my jobs is really to try to make sure our coaches receive competitive pay compared to comparable school districts. So I'm working on my I guess I'll call it a pitch to the stipend committee to try to increase coaches' pay. Those are just a few examples. I serve on a lot of sort of community committees or community groups. The Columbia Sports Commission, for example. I'm on the Show Me State Games Steering Committee. I'm on the board of directors for a Women's Intersport Network. So really, again, looking at kind of big picture, macro level, district-wide type programs and things to really help ensure we're providing a as much as possible an equitable and fair and fun opportunity for kids.
So with your position now, what was kind of your career path going up until this point? And along those steps along the way, what were some things you learned to, help you thrive in this new position?
Yeah. So started out, I was an education major in college and got my first job out of college at Rockbridge High School, and where I taught for 9 years as a social studies teacher. But also had an opportunity to coach during that time. I was an assistant basketball coach under Coach Scanlon, and also had some other leadership opportunities. I was the department chair for social studies. I served on the school's executive council. And so a lot of those experiences really helped shape some of the leadership skills. And so in 2013, I then stepped into the athletic director role at Rockbridge High School, where I served for 7 years. The building level AD involves a lot more like organization and management and more of the micro level type stuff. So whether it was building schedules or hiring and evaluating coaches or just navigating kind of the day-to-day conflicts, I really kind of learned a lot about how to balance, how to prioritize, how to establish appropriate boundaries. And then that led to 2020, where I was hired for this role and really probably faced the greatest challenge I've faced in the course of my career to this point, which was the COVID pandemic. And we started the 2020 school year fully online, but we still did fall sports, but we did so with all these measures and trying to work with the health department to figure out how to do it safely. And then hearing from the community on both ends, I'm hearing from some people who are so angry that we're not doing more and that we're not allowing more fans. And I'm also hearing from other people who are saying I'm going to be responsible for people dying, right? Which is hard to hear. So navigating those difficulties has really helped me sort of grow my perspective, appreciate that balcony view, and really try to be balanced in my approach.
Dealing with such a tough problem that is COVID, those aren't scenarios like that don't come every single day. So what are some lessons you kind of learned from dealing with such a large scale issue? So whenever it comes down to, maybe there's something going on in a specific school where it's such a minor issue. What are some things you take from dealing with that bigger thing to help with the smaller?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that's one of the things I've learned a lot in. I would not say I've mastered. It's something I need to constantly work on. But I think one thing it has helped me do is to realize that while this may be a major issue for the person that's bringing it forward, when I take a step back, allow myself to not necessarily have like an emotional response, but make sure I'm taking everything in, just taking a step back, slowing down just a little bit and evaluating it. it then allows me, I think, to tackle it or address it in a manner that is, one, appropriate for the scale of how serious it is, but also with empathy for the person that's bringing the issue forward, because it is a big deal to them, right? And so it does need to be taken seriously. And so every day we face challenges and problems and things come up. And so every day we have to work to solve those. And usually for the person that is bringing it forward, it's a big deal to them. And so even if in the grand scheme of things, it really maybe isn't, we need to be empathetic to that, and we need to treat it like it's a big deal. And we need to make sure we are leaning into it in a manner that is trying to bring about resolution that is satisfactory for everyone. Yep.
Whenever you're on that larger scale, looking at the whole district, like you're not, like you said, starting as an athletic director, activities director for Rockbridge,
Yep.
but now as you're overseeing the whole district, what are some things that you do to try and stay, I don't know if impartial is the right word, but you're kind of trying to make sure that you're having a grasp over everything that's happening in the district, not maybe the high school level, but just all over.
Yeah.
What are some things you're doing?
That's a great question, because the reality is there will be, and I know this and it's true and it's totally fine, but there's going to be individuals within our community who are going to suspect that I have a Rockbridge bias, right? And I'm sensitive to that. My predecessor in this role was a Hickman grad, and there was, I feel like, especially now that I've sat in his chair, I really feel like he did that job as impartially as he possibly could. But there were people who suspect he had a Hickman bias, right? So I'm sensitive to that. I'd really tried to make sure. Now, one thing I will say, I didn't grow up in Columbia. I didn't graduate from any of these high schools. And while I did work at Rockbridge High School, I really don't have the emotional attachment that comes with being an alumni. So once I stepped into the district role, it was easy for me to cheer for all of our teams. But I tried to be present at all of our schools as much as possible in a balanced sort of way. One goal that I always set for myself every year is I want to see every single team compete at some point. So that's all of our middle school, all of our high school teams, some of our non-spectator friendly sports like golf, tennis, swimming. Try to make sure I'm present at those events. But I really try to be intentional about being present for every single one of our teams, and making sure that I'm providing, district procedure and district policy and Title IX law require equity. So it's easy in a lot of ways to be equitable, but as far as I really try to be intentional with my attention and my presence at all of our schools.
Yeah, so with, you are, it's such a big position, a lot to do, a lot to cover. What are some of the things that make it hard, but then also the things that make it easy, where it's like, as you go on, how does that work?
Yeah, so the hard part, I'll probably get a little too specific on some of this. Some of the hard part, though, is when there are some of those competing, whether it's jealousies or competing perceptions amongst our own schools, because inevitably there is a perception that this school's getting this over that or whatever, and usually it's not the case, but trying to navigate that and help change that perspective can be challenging. It also, I'll just be honest, it also becomes tricky when you have students who transfer from one school to another school in town, and sometimes the community can get upset about that. And so really making sure is the transfer in compliant with district policy, with mission bylaws, because a lot of times I will have to investigate and look into that to make sure everything's in compliance there. On the easier, and I don't know if this is, I would say this is what makes my role not necessarily easier, but as I compare it to being the building AD at Rockbridge, I do have a bit more flexibility, right? I'm not directly responsible for the supervision of kids in my current role, and so that allows me to bounce from school to school, from event to event, and really just have a lot more flexibility to support our teams, more so than working at the building level.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for today's episode of the CPS 360 interviews. I'm Ben Drury. Have a good rest of your day.